What if one small act of kindness came back decades later to expose a lie so big it destroyed an entire family? In 1997, a struggling cafe quietly fed two homeless boys, never imagining that moment would echo across 21 years of secrets, betrayal, and hidden bloodlines. This is a story about trust given too freely, love built on lies, and a husband who thought the past could be buried with money and silence. But time remembers everything. When those boys return as powerful men, they don't come asking for gratitude, they come carrying truth. What follows is not violence, not cruelty, but something far more devastating: exposure. Watch how patience becomes a weapon, how loyalty outlives betrayal, and how a carefully constructed life collapses under the weight of its own deception. Stay with this story because every choice has a cost, and some debts take decades to collect. Winter in 1997 had a way of stripping people down to their truth. The cafe barely survived those months, running on weak coffee, unpaid bills, and stubborn pride. Before sunrise, two boys waited outside every morning, pretending the cold didn't hurt. Torn jackets, hollow eyes, and a quiet dignity that made looking away impossible. Leftover food was never wasted. Plates were placed near the back door without questions, without names, without witnesses. Kindness stayed silent because the world had already been loud enough to them. At the time, marriage felt like a refuge from struggle. A husband entered the picture with confidence, promises, and an easy smile that reassured investors and charmed customers. He praised generosity in public, but criticized it behind closed doors, calling it weakness, bad business, a liability. The boys were never mentioned again. Neither was the money that started disappearing shortly after vows were exchanged. Years passed. The cafe grew busier, yet freedom shrank. Accounts were managed elsewhere. Papers arrived already signed. Every concern was met with reassurance or anger, depending on his mood. Trust slowly became a tool used against the one who offered it freely. What looked like protection was really control, and what felt like partnership was quiet erasure. Still, memory doesn't starve the way people do. Those boys were never forgotten. Faces stayed etched in mind during long nights of counting receipts that didn't add up. A strange guilt lingered, an unspoken fear that kindness alone wasn't enough to save them from a cruel world. That fear turned into something heavier years later, when fragments of truth surfaced: unexplained transfers, hidden accounts, and whispered conversations cut short whenever footsteps approached. The truth came together slowly, like frost forming on glass. The husband knew those boys, not as strangers, not as charity cases. They were family he had erased to protect ambition, inheritance, and reputation. Their homelessness was not an accident of fate, but a deliberate abandonment, sealed with money stolen from the very cafe that fed them. The kindness given in 1997 didn't just keep two boys alive. It preserved a connection stronger than lies, contracts, or marriage vows. That single choice, feeding hungry children without asking who they were, bound destinies together in ways no one could undo. Because mercy remembers everything, and so do the ones who survive it. Marriage arrived disguised as safety. He spoke of shared futures, steady growth, and protecting what had been built from nothing. Trust was offered easily, because love often feels like proof enough. Papers were signed across kitchen tables. Numbers explained just well enough to quiet doubt. Whenever questions surfaced, reassurance followed. Smooth, confident, absolute. That voice learned how to calm fear while quietly feeding it. Money began to vanish in ways that didn't make sense. Profits increased, yet accounts shrank. He insisted it was strategy, expansion, necessary sacrifice. Disagreement was framed as ingratitude. Silence became easier than conflict. Emotional distance crept in slowly, masked by gifts, apologies, and promises that tomorrow would be different. The manipulation wasn't loud. It lived in subtle corrections, in the rewriting of memories, in the suggestion that confusion meant weakness. Concerns were turned back like accusations. Love became conditional, earned through obedience, maintained through compliance. Somewhere along the way, partnership dissolved into control. Then came the lies that cut deeper than finances. Late-night phone calls ended abruptly. Old files were hidden behind newer ones. A name appeared once on a bank transfer, then disappeared forever. That name belonged to one of the boys once fed in silence years ago. Digging further unraveled everything. Those boys were never strangers. They were blood. Family erased with intention. When they threatened inheritance and image, he chose abandonment over responsibility. Their suffering was collateral damage in the pursuit of status. The cafe's money funded that erasure. Funds were redirected to keep secrets buried. Payoffs, legal shields, silence purchased at the expense of honesty. Every warm meal served to those boys had unknowingly been an act of defiance against the very man who later claimed ownership over it all. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was moral, emotional, a deliberate shaping of reality meant to keep power firmly in his hands. Love had been used as leverage. Trust had been weaponized. The marriage itself was a transaction, not a bond. Realization came with grief, then clarity. The man who promised protection had been the greatest threat all along. The boys he discarded survived without him. The woman he tried to control began seeing everything he tried to hide. Some lies last for years. Others collapse the moment truth decides it has waited long enough. 21 years passed quietly, the way storms gather far from shore. The cafe transformed into a polished brand, praised in magazines and celebrated at public events. Success wrapped itself around the marriage like armor, convincing outsiders that everything was solid, earned, untouchable. The husband stood proudly at the center of it all, telling stories that always positioned him as the architect of survival. No one questioned the gaps. No one asked whose sacrifices were missing from the narrative. Then the past walked back in. The boys arrived as men, carrying themselves with a calm confidence that only comes from surviving what was meant to destroy. Their presence shifted the air in the room instantly. Smiles faltered, laughter thinned. Recognition hit before logic could interfere. The husband froze, eyes revealing fear long before words could catch up. Time, it seemed, had finally closed the distance he worked so hard to bury. They didn't come seeking gratitude. They came armed with truth. Documents were laid out with surgical precision. Bank records, trust papers, old legal filings tied directly to the husband's name. Every missing dollar had a destination. Every lie had a timestamp. The money siphoned from the cafe over decades wasn't for growth or protection. It was hush money. It was inheritance control. It was payment for erasing family ties that didn't fit the image he sold to the world. The revelation unraveled everything at once. Guests watched as success turned brittle, as authority cracked under the weight of undeniable proof. The husband tried to speak, to explain, to regain control, but time had stripped him of that power. The men he abandoned no longer needed anything from him. Not money, not acknowledgement, not remorse. What they wanted was exposure. The cafe that once fed them in silence had unknowingly funded their abandonment. The marriage built on promises had been secured with stolen loyalty. Every celebration held within those walls now carried the echo of betrayal. The truth didn't shout. It simply stood there, impossible to ignore. Watching it all unfold felt unreal, like witnessing a story finally being told the right way. The Goys didn't stay long. They never intended to reclaim the past, only to return it. Some people think revenge is about destruction, but this was something cleaner. It was time collecting its debt. Justice didn't arrive with raised voices or shattered glass. It moved quietly, the same way truth always does when it knows it can no longer be ignored. After the exposure, the husband tried to regain footing, issuing statements, rewriting timelines, blaming misunderstandings. But lies lose their strength once they're seen clearly. The collapse was slow and public. Business partners stepped back first, uneasy with unanswered questions and documented proof they couldn't dismiss. Accounts were frozen pending investigations. Properties once flaunted as symbols of success were suddenly under review. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. The charm that once opened every door now echoed uselessly in empty rooms. At home, the silence was heavier than any argument. The man who once controlled every narrative paced like a stranger, haunted by memories he thought money had erased. Old photographs surfaced, faces crossed out of family albums, names removed from records. Every attempt to justify abandonment only exposed the cruelty beneath it. Ambition had demanded sacrifices, and he chose the easiest ones. Children who couldn't fight back, a partner who trusted too deeply. There was no satisfaction in watching the unraveling, only clarity. Love had never been absent, it had been exploited. Loyalty had been real, it had simply been one-sided. The boys he discarded stood taller now, not because they sought revenge, but because survival had taught them patience. They understood that timing was everything. Truth delivered too early gets buried. Truth delivered at the right moment reshapes history. No accusations were shouted, no threats were made. Legal consequences followed naturally, like shadows at sunset. The cafe's ownership returned to where it belonged. Financial records spoke louder than emotion ever could. Reputation, once carefully polished, cracked under the weight of undeniable facts. The husband watched it all happen, powerless for the first time. Memory, it turns out, is relentless. Every kind act he mocked, every bond he severed, every dollar stolen to protect his image came back with interest. There was nothing left to manipulate, no one left to blame. The boys didn't celebrate, they simply moved forward. So did the woman who finally saw the full shape of the truth, not as a victim, but as someone no longer willing to carry another person's shame. Cruelty was never required, because the most lasting justice is letting a man face the consequences he worked so hard to avoid. If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you see kindness and betrayal differently, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories are about truth, consequences, and the power of time, and there are many more waiting for you. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next story where secrets surface and justice finds its way home.